Major spoilers for anyone not caught up on the Dr. Stone anime. There's a reason everyone is excited for Season 3. Well, 2, I guess if you count the whole Dr. Stone is basically One Piece thing. But the other reason is that this is the first season without Tsukasa. You know, Tsukasa, the guy who's been the main villain since forever. He was actually the perfect villain for Dr. Stone. He was a genuine kind person like Senku, but was also powerful and posed both a philosophical and very real threat to him as well. And then they effectively killed him and Dr. Stone lost him. Which might sound like a problem, because it's like, okay, you went from having the perfect villain to now the characters are kinda just doing whatever. But besides the fact that Tsukasa hasn't actually been killed yet, Tsukasa's being put on the sideline is actually a good thing. It's done so well that once that perfect villain is out of the picture, it completely changes how you view Dr. Stone. First of all, you look at the narrative differently. Tsukasa is introduced very early. In fact, he is the first character that Senku and Taiju revive. So the early narrative of Dr. Stone is sort of tied in with Tsukasa and his motivations. With the conflict between Senku and Tsukasa, Dr. Stone presents itself as a conflict between the need to build and innovate and the moral dilemmas of industry and progress. So to have one half of that conflict effectively ripped out of the story seems like kind of a problem, because it's like, how do you continue a story about this conflict when the conflict just ended? And the answer is that there never really is a conflict. Yes, there was a literal conflict between Senku's forces and Tsukasa's forces, but Senku and Tsukasa were never really truly enemies. You can see this in the OP for Season 2 when they cross paths rather than directly opposing each other. They're not in conflict. Rather, they want the same thing, and they're just going about it in different ways. Senku by speedrunning civilization, and Tsukasa by trying to create a paradise free from greed. But Tsukasa was also playing God. I mean, think about it. Isn't it kind of arrogant to claim that you know better than everyone else how to rule over the perfect world? Tsukasa chooses who lives and who doesn't, and in a way, he's punished for playing God when he's betrayed by Hyuga. But see, we needed that betrayal, because when Tsukasa loses to Senku, it is a complete loss. He loses strategically when he's forced to agree to a ceasefire, and he loses his conviction when he's forced to see that science can save everyone, including his sister. At this point, Tsukasa reaches the beginning of a transformation. He starts to be redeemed from his role as the villain of the story. So when he's betrayed, it's almost like his debt for his sins is paid, and now he can start to be one of the good guys. Well, he still has to deal with the whole being frozen thing, but we don't have to get into semantics. Anyway, all this suffering that Tsukasa has to go through shows that he's never really in conflict with Senku. He wants the same thing, but fears the greed of others. But he mistakenly believes that the end justifies the means and is punished for it. At that point, Tsukasa's arc as the villain of the story is tied up. We're shown that he never really was the bad guy after all, and Inagaki creates the perfect opportunity to take the story in a new direction. By doing so, we realize that Dr. Stone isn't meant to be a story about science versus greed or anything like that. In fact, once Tsukasa is out of the picture, the story leans into the whole greed thing, further proving that the so-called greed of progress and desire was always a non-problem. Which I could and just might dedicate a whole video to discussing centered around our boy Ryusui, but for now we need to look at the second way Tsukasa's quote-unquote death changes how we view Dr. Stone. Actually, before I do that, make sure to like the video if you're enjoying it so far. It's the easiest way to support the channel, and it helps spread the video to other viewers like you. Now, the other way you begin to see Dr. Stone differently is how it handles its villains. Narratively speaking, Tsukasa was the perfect villain because his ideals paralleled Senku's, but he was also the perfect villain because he was strong where Senku was weak. Senku has the advantage in scientific knowledge, but Tsukasa could one-punch Senku whenever he wanted. And while Senku was making allies, Tsukasa was gathering an army of beefed-up soldiers. So with a conflict like this, it seems like the story was about using science to overcome power. But this completely changes when Tsukasa is taken out of the picture and we move to Treasure Island. I'll keep the spoilers to a minimum for anyone who is anime only, but if you've seen the new OP, then you can probably guess that this guy is the new villain. This guy is Abara. As you can see, Abara is not the world's strongest primate high schooler. He's a discount anime Jafar. But while Abara might not be as strong as Tsukasa, he's more cunning. And I use the word cunning deliberately because using the word smart creates some confusion. Abara is smart, but he's not smart like Senku is. Senku is all around smart, but he's also smart when it comes to science. Abara is all around smart, but he doesn't even know what a toaster is. But both characters are still intelligent. Plus, there's also the fact that Senku is in enemy territory. Before, everything took place in an area we, the readers, were always familiar with, so we never had that element of not knowing what was around the corner. Now the characters are in a completely new location with characters we've never met before and know almost nothing about. This is where you can see how Treasure Island presents a different kind of obstacle for Senku. There was some strategy in stopping Tsukasa, but it was effectively, okay, how do we stop this gorilla from killing us? Now Senku is in unknown territory against a villain he knows nothing about, who just so happens to be a master strategist. We move from a conflict between science and might to a conflict between science and cunning. Now, more than ever, it is a battle of minds. And that is what Dr. Stone does best. Not pinning super strong characters against each other, although let's be honest, the fights in Dr. Stone are awesome, but that's not what you read Dr. Stone for. At the end of the day, you read Dr. Stone to see Senku play a big game of chess against the villain. At least that's how things eventually turn out. So for example, right, let's look at how Season 2 plays out. Like I said, there is strategy. Senku has to come up with a plan to force Tsukasa into a ceasefire, and he does. He charges up with a tank to take control of the cave. When Tsukasa shows up, he distracts Tsukasa while he puts together some dynamite, a weapon that poses a pretty big threat to Tsukasa, forcing him to agree to a ceasefire. But then what happens? Hyoga betrays Tsukasa, and now Senku and Tsukasa have to fight against Hyoga. At the end of the day, all you're seeing is a fight, which is what you can see in any other Jump series. But this isn't what happens in Season 3. Again, not gonna spoil it for anyone who is anime only, but here's how things are different. So Senku and the other characters pull up to Treasure Island. As soon as they get there, they realize the bad guys have a mysterious weapon that seems to go beyond modern science, which makes no sense considering the people of Treasure Island are primitive. Add onto that the fact that Abara has control over the island, so the characters have to be careful or else they're basically screwed. Add onto that the fact that the whole reason they're there in the first place is to get the treasure Byakuya left behind. So they're on an island they know nothing about, against a ruler that has a weapon they know nothing about. And if they want the treasure, they have to stop the villain at the same time or it's game over, forcing Senku to come up with a big brain strategy to stop the villain and get what he needs. But this time, it doesn't just turn into a big fight. There are fights, but they happen as part of the game of chess rather than becoming the main event. Because this weapon is so powerful, the conflict turns into a game of each leader trying to outsmart and outmaneuver the other. Because once they gain control of the weapon, there is no fight, and it's instantly game over for the other person. There's a bunch of layers and moves that go into it, and it's got a lot of moving parts as opposed to Senku directly fighting the villain. And it's when you watch this unfold that you realize that this is what you're signing up for with Dr. Stone. Not big fights, but intense games of chess between Senku and the villains. And you only come to that realization once Tsukasa is taken out of the picture as the villain and replaced with someone whose main strength isn't so much power as it is cunning, which is why replacing Tsukasa and taking him out of the story is done so well. It changes how you look at Dr. Stone, both in the overall conflict of the story and what it's really about, and in the kind of obstacles Senku has to overcome. It's a perfectly crafted shift in the story that takes an already amazing series, and shows you that it's actually even better. But maybe you disagree. Did you prefer when Tsukasa was the main villain? How would you say Tsukasa's replacement changed Dr. Stone? Share your thoughts and see what everyone else has to say down in the comments. I'll pick my favorite and share it as comment of the week on my community tab. And if you'd like another discussion like this one, then check out my recent Dr. Stone video. In that video, I share my thoughts on the future of Dr. Stone in 2023. You can find that video in the playlist linked right here. Until then, thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.